Welcome to Resonate Behind the Scenes, the bite-sized insider's look at how entrepreneurs, coaches, and consultants have harnessed the power of storytelling to create powerful, authentic personal brands and scale their businesses using smart systems and processes. Now, today on this short episode, we welcome one of our previous podcast guests on Starting Over, the brilliant Dan Millman, who has been a remarkable, enduring presence, I've got to say, on this self-development space. So I'm very excited, Dan, to hear about how on earth you have done that.
Well, thank you, Shannon, for that introduction. And since life is a series of moments, I do have some brilliant moments. I also have some pretty stupid ones, like most of us.
Like
So
most of us.
you could have introduced me equally true. This is the stupid Dan Millman. It just depends on what moment you catch me.
Well, let's
Um,
let's make sure we get a couple of those moments. But
yes,
first, I want to give a little intro to who you are. What have you done in your work life in this space for people who might not know anything about you?
I started out as a young boy on loving jumping on the trampoline. And that led to a college scholarship, a world championship, gymnastics career, coaching career at Stanford University, assistant professor at Oberlin College in physical education. Then I began writing books. I've written 18 books over the last 40 years, been read by millions of people in 29 languages. They made a movie of one of my books. So that's, in a nutshell, a brief introduction to me and my work. It's been an odd path. And what you described in the introduction in Resonate, it sounds almost strategic. These are the stories I tell, the anecdotes I've studied in order to be a speaker, but I don't do any of that. I have no trail of breadcrumbs to follow, no strategy or plan, because each of us has a different path. We do things in our own way. And one of the central tenets I teach is there's no best approach, strategy, book, religion, path, philosophy, teacher, diet, or system of exercise. There's only the best for each of us at a given time of our life. And so I think it's important for each of us to recognize life is an experiment. We try it like any good algorithm or AI. We try it, and if it doesn't work, we do something else. And as that saying goes, you win or you learn. And
Yes.
with learning, we have stepping stones. I used to fail 50 times a day in the gymnasium, trying moves and crashing. And eventually, though, I was able to use those failures as stepping stones. So I went for a walk the other day through Prospect Park here in Brooklyn, New York. And he's an executive consultant, corporate consultant, entrepreneurial consultant. And we were talking about that topic. And the one thing that struck me that seems honest and realistic is that we cannot control the outcomes in our life. I wish I could promise success by re-engineering and retrofitting and doing all these things that other people do. But we can't control the outcomes. That's a fact of life. We can't control whether we sink every putt or make every basket or find love or success. But by making a good effort over time, that's the horse I'm betting on, because we vastly increase the odds through our efforts of success, of our desired outcomes, over not making the efforts. And I think it was Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, who said you make 0% of the shots you don't take. So we've all heard that, I think. So that's really, I don't have any formula for success. I was very lucky, and I'm not being modest. Much of it was timing. I happened to write a book that failed. Actually, it failed.
How
When I
so?
wrote Way of the Peaceful Warrior, it went out of print very quickly because nobody understood the subtitle. This is before the internet age. And it was just bookstores. And they didn't know whether, because it said a basically true story. And the bookstores were not amused. They did not know what shelf to put it on. Is it fiction or nonfiction? It can't be both. Well, it is both. So they didn't know what to do with it, and it didn't get into many stores, and it died. And it only came back 3 or 4 years later when this old gentleman decided, I love this book. He read one of the few copies out there, and he said, I'm going back into publishing. He was a retired publisher. And it took him 2 years to get the big book chains to take one copy in each store. So
And
mine
then,
is not an overnight
and then what it
success.
became. It wasn't an overnight success, but what did
No.
that become, that book for you?
But the word of mouth started. It just happened to resonate and touch many people. And it's still doing well. It was a 1980 book originally, and it's still selling very well today. And it amazes me. And this is not out of a sense of modesty or anything like that. But that's the path. I mean, we don't mind failing. Failure was my
Yes.
friend. I was used to it.
See, this is what I hear, Dan, because I love your honesty, and what you're sharing is such just a refreshing breath, really. It's different, and yet there are nuggets of wisdom in what you share that I think could be applicable to so many people. Like what you're saying here about that bias towards action, the willingness to experiment and try new things and fail in the second point. Like understand that failure is a necessary stepping stone to success even. So shift your mindset around that. Like I think there are little bits here that have probably set you up to live the life that you've had and probably have more happiness and joy along the way, I suspect.
Well, there have been pleasant surprises and unpleasant ones. That's the path. You know, one of the things I've learned, and you mentioned action, because people ask me, but what about fear? What about self-doubt? You know, Barbara Rasp, a wonderful writer, said, the lesson is simple, the student is complicated. And we tend to complicate everything. And but how do I get motivated? And it really doesn't work like that. I think more realistically, it's about accepting our thoughts and feelings, all those things that come up that say you can't do it, or I don't know if I'm up to this, is accepting our thoughts and feelings, positive or negative, as natural to us in that moment. They just came up. They came into our awareness. They will pass. And the second thing is, meanwhile, what is your goal? What do you want? And the third approach is to do what needs to be done. Whether or not you're motivated or inspired. I think I may have mentioned in our original podcast
You did.
that somebody came up to me after a talk and said, Dan, I feel really inspired. I said, don't worry, it will pass. Because
Joy Hill.
inspiration passes, motivation waxes and wanes.
Yes.
But it's about doing it. And those who do it over time and continue making an effort are more likely to reach some level of success, which I define as making progress toward a meaningful goal. To me, that's success, not just reaching some destination.
Yes, of course. It's such a pitfall because it's like a fallacy of arrival. You never fully arrive, and it's not what you expected, I think.
Right. Exactly.
Something that does stand out to me about you, Dan, and it absolutely stood out to me on the podcast episode we recorded together, and I'd encourage anyone listening who hasn't to really go back and listen. You told a story about a guy who came up to you, I think when you were doing a keynote speech or a lecture, and he said to you, what advice can you give him for $1? He was just a student. He didn't have very much money. And he said, I have 6 words for you. If you pay attention and make them a lifetime practice, they will be worth more than their weight in gold or something. And you said they were, correct me if I'm wrong, was it here and now, breathe and relax?
That's correct. I'm glad you remember that.
It stuck with me. It stuck with me because I was like, this is so simple and so powerful. And there's something in that you say like, okay, perhaps I haven't had all this training. I've stumbled across things, finding my own way. And yet you are such a brilliant storyteller. You have a way with words, and you talk and share these examples that really deeply resonate because they're not just the encyclopedic kind of information that any dictionary or new artificial intelligence can spurt out. So at the same time, I'm like, how do you do that? Or maybe for somebody who doesn't have perhaps the same natural aptitude as you, I don't know, how would they go about working on that in themselves?
Well, we've all said, hey, that reminds me of a story. Or, oh, that happened to me. Something like that happened to me. And then we tell the story of that. And so if we're just open with our own life, the more we know ourselves, and I emphasize self-knowledge. We all know every educational, philosophical, spiritual, psychological tradition is about knowing ourselves. If we don't know ourselves, we make the right decision for the wrong person, the one we thought we were. We've all had that experience in relationships or career decisions. But the more we know ourselves, what are my values? What are my talents? What are my interests? Then the more likely we are to make wiser decisions for ourselves. And so it takes time to get to know ourselves. What are my values? What are really my interests? And how is that different from what I think I should do? Those kinds of things really help us to guide us so we can become our own North Star.
Have you had any system that you've implemented that's helped you to retain this kind of knowledge, unless you just have an amazing brain that you've got all these stories of your life that you seem to remember them and they miraculously come up at the moment? Or is this just like even your meditation of working on being present so that you're not stressed out when you're talking or giving a speech in public or hosting a retreat, which I know you've done as well?
Oh, yeah. Well, the here and now, breathe and relax, those 6 words are kind of an antidote to stress, because we all go through stressful situations, but if we take a deep breath and relax the body, that's a whole different experience than being tense and stressed and inhibiting our breathing. So by remembering to take a deep breath and relax, we can do that in any situation. And just remember to do that more often. Shake the body loose, let it go. That's in our control. And that it helps us to deal with those stressful situations, not avoid them, because it's a part of life. So, but as far as how to do it, some of it's just my own unique predispositions. But anyone can practice, hey, you have a story about that? What does that remind you of? And, I mean, I'm a stone's throw from 80 years old, and I'm still staying active, doing what needs to be done. And that's how I roll.
If you were to say, well, answer this, why do you think you have had such enduring success in this space? Why do you think your book is resonating with so many people 3.5 decades later?
I don't know.
Or one of them? No.
I have theories about it. I think it helped. Somehow it was put together in such a way people could relate to. And many people did. And now the subtitle of the book is A Book That Changes Lives. And I've asked people who said, this book changed my life, this book changed my life. I said, what do you mean by that? And I think it changed their perspectives. It reminded them, and that's all any teacher like myself can do, is to remind people of what they already know at deeper levels, but we tend to forget. So that's what the book managed somehow to do in my story, enhanced by some fictional elements based on autobiographical material. Somehow that story came together, and people related to it. And I can't tell people how to write a best-selling book. I think it was E.M. Forster who said, there are 3 essential rules for writing a successful novel. Unfortunately, nobody knows what they are.
Yes. Oh, Dad, you're ruining this. No, I'm just kidding. Oh my gosh. However, you are making me think of one thing. You mentioned there about shifting perspectives and what it means, like with people saying your book changed their life. And one thing that I do ask people who are giving a presentation or thinking about what they want to share, whether that's writing a book or creating a coaching business, I will ask certain questions, hopefully, so that they will get to some of the answers themselves.
Great.
And I will ask, what is the main message you want to share? What is the perspective you want to shift? And what action do you want people to take as a result of listening to you?
Excellent.
Yes?
Excellent. Yeah, that's so useful to people because it turns their attention away from themselves. People who are afraid to speak, they get nervous. Now, there's the only difference between fear and excitement is whether we're breathing. So they need to keep breathing, take a deep breath, say to themselves, I'm really psyched, I'm excited, rather than I'm nervous.
Yeah.
And then they need to focus not on what do people think of me? How do I look? Will they like me? Will I bore them? And all about me, me, me. Focus on what is it about? What do you want to share? If you're speaking, there's something you want to tell about. And then we come to your guidelines, which is turning their attention to what they want to give to the people listening.
Yes. It is true, actually, now you mention it like that, the kind of mindset shift around it. And I think it really helps because we do live in these little egotistical worlds where we're so terrified of judgment and doing the wrong thing and messing up, and embracing failure seems great on paper. And then when you're in that moment, you're like, oh gosh, okay, this is something else. But part and parcel of life, I suppose.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Dan, thank you so much for sharing your little nuggets of wisdom there with us and reminding me and everyone listening to have the courage, I think, to forge your own path and to trust that things will unfold for you as they're supposed to, but not without the excuse of taking action. You still got to do some stuff and put some effort in.
Right, exactly.
Yes, yeah.
Well, it's a pleasure to share with you and with your audience.
Yeah.
My best wishes to you all.
And to everyone listening, as I said before, I highly encourage you to go back and listen to the full episode with Dan over on Resonate, which is linked in the show notes below. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.